What's up, everybody? It is Jordan here from Hive Mind Hobbies. In this video, I'm going to talk about whether or not our beloved bug monster, the Carnifex, is actually a good unit, or if it is just a distraction. Taking a look at our humble Carnifex, first looking at the defensive profile, which in my opinion is one of the better parts of the Carnifex. It's T9, 2-up save, and 8 wounds. Not something that is going to tank an entire night worth of shooting or fighting, but your opponent is going to have to commit something pretty substantial in order to kill and take out a Carnifex. The cool thing about the defensive profile being so good is also their data sheet ability, the blood surge. Whenever they get shot, if they take any wounds, they move d6+2 closer to your opponent, and of course they can get into combat with that. So it's pretty good if you move up your Carnifexes and you say, hey, deal with my Carnifexes, and if your opponent is not far enough away from the Carnifexes, you just blood surge into them, and then boom, you get your Carnifexes in combat, and their unit is probably dead. I say probably because the biggest downfall of the Carnifex is all of its weapons, no matter ranged or melee, hit on 4s. I understand we want Carnifexes to be seen as these bumbling buffoon bugs, but I don't know. I think they could just hit on 3s, right? I don't think that would be a problem. In addition, the weapons are not great. And I will say, I think the main reason why I think the Carnifex's weapons are not great is just because at a base, they hit on 4s, The Venom Cannon is swinging on its shots with D3 and the Strength 9, AP2, 3 damage, which is 3 damage, which is pretty good. However, the swinginess of it and the swinginess of your ballistic skill being 4-ups is kind of tough. Stranglethorn, as well as the same. I think I just don't like the Stranglethorn because of its low AP, and I don't mind the swinginess of that because you're going to get D6+1 shots, which is that's not too bad number of shots. However, the low AP and then again the swinginess of the 4-up to hit is kind of tough. However, and we will talk about Old One-Eye in great length in this video, if you attach 2 Carnifexes with Old One-Eye, they reroll all their hits, and all of a sudden you don't care about that 4-ups to hit anymore, especially when they've got 24 shots coming from 4 Death Spitters each. That's a pretty good combo. The truth is, I don't think Carnifexes are quite great. If you were just to take a Carnifex and say, boom, here's a Carnifex, I'm going to put it on the table, and you don't have any buffs or specific combos in mind for the Carnifex, it is probably not going to get its points worth back in the game. Again, hitting on 4s and no inherent rerolls on their data sheets makes them pretty unreliable. In addition, if you're taking 2 of them, that's 230 points. That's not cheap, right? That's not an amount of points that you don't care about if they die or if they don't do anything in the game. Talking about how to make Carnifexes good, I think they're actually pretty good as just one-ofs in Crusher Stampede. You don't take them as the 2-man squad. I think that would be too many points to invest into them. You just maybe take 2 single Carnifexes and you run them up the flank, right? They take quite a bit to kill, of course, from what we've talked about with the T9 2-up save and 8 wounds. And if your opponent doesn't measure correctly, or if they think they're going to immediately kill a Carnifex, but they don't, you could blood surge into them. And then, of course, you would get +1 to hit from being wounded at all. And then maybe, if you really, really struck gold, maybe your Carnifex is just below half, and then you get +1 to wound as well. They don't bracket, so like any buffs that you stack on them from Crusher Stampede are just going to be there, unless your opponent's unit has -1 to hit or whatever, etc., etc. And then in addition, they're not attached to Old One-Eye, so they won't get the rerolls, but you can just spend a CP for full rerolls to hit in combat for them. That's pretty good. Because of that, I probably would lean all melee on these Carnifexes, especially if you're taking them singleton, just because I think the reroll 1s to hit melee is pretty powerful, and the threat of a Carnifex just barely wounded and then blood surging into your opponent after they've shot at it seems pretty spooky. In addition, these are one of these units that you can use them to initiate fights in the center of the board. There's 115 points on them, so they're not super, super cheap. However, they're going to be cheaper than your Maleceptor or your Norn Emissary or your Hive Tyrants or whatever else that is hopefully going to be backing them up. Could be pretty good. Let me know in the comments below if you have tried these Carnifexes and Crusher Stampede like I've been talking about. Old One Eye and the homies. I think the main way that Carnifexes have seen the table, even in competitive play in 10th edition, is 2 Carnifexes attached to Old One Eye. And that is because, of course, the main thing that I've been talking about, the reason why we don't see Carnifexes, is they don't hit very well. Well, if you attach them with Old One Eye and you give them rerolls to all of your hits, you're probably going to hit way more often. It's a pretty powerful combo, especially with 3 pretty powerful monsters in that case. If you put them in Invasion Fleet, the DAC effects that I've been talking about, you get 24 shots off of all of those Death Spitters and then all the smaller guns as well. Re-rolling that number of shots in Invasion Fleet, if you have Sustain or Lethals, or maybe both if you're standing next to a Hive Tyrant, is pretty good. That's a lot of shots, and that's going to do quite a bit of damage into really whatever those Carnifexes are looking at. In addition, it's a really good Overwatch threat. If you put this big blob of Carnifexes in the open and your opponent wants to maybe tie them up with scouts or move block or something, they're going to think twice, because then they're going to have 24 shots coming at them, re-rolling all their hits, sustain, and possibly lethal. That's pretty gross, and there's a good chance that, if your opponent is putting something small in front of those Carnifexes, it will not be there by the end of their movement phase. In addition, this allows for Old One Eye to blood search with the Carnifexes. That's awesome. That's incredible. You get them up the field a little bit quicker, a little bit more movement on Old One Eye, because he hits like a truck. If you haven't tried the double Carnifex and Old One Eye combo, try it out. I think the Death Spitter and a whole bunch of shots from all of the guns is probably the best way to go. However, if you try it out in Subterranean Assault, there's a pretty good argument to just kit them out full melee, get a nasty 6-inch charge, and then boom, you got a death ball of Carnifexes in your opponent's deployment zone. Some pretty cool stuff. Talking about Old One Eye himself, and I probably should do a whole video just talking about him. He's pretty good by himself as well. So if you're ever in this weird spot where you have 140 points, I believe he's still at 150 points, and you're like, man, I could really use just a good melee threat. Well, there you go. Old One Eye. Put him in there, slam dunk him, and see what happens. He's really good. I think his number of attacks is a little bit low, and he doesn't hit on 4s. He does hit on 3s. So it's not, I don't know, hitting on 3s for a character like him seems like they're missing the mark just a little bit. I understand Carnifexes are dumb, but it's Old One Eye. He should be hitting on 2s. The fact that he also doesn't have any inherent rerolls either is kind of tough. If you put him in Subterranean Assault, of course, it helps a little bit. One thing that I do want to say is, remember his regeneration ability, which happens every single command phase. It happens on your opponents and it happens on yours. It's pretty powerful. It's pretty good. It's going to keep this guy living for much longer than your opponent probably thinks, especially when you pair it up with his 5-up Feel No Pain all of the time. He's a tank. He's pretty good. I will say, without an invulnerable save, the 5-up Feel No Pains and the regeneration, I would shade a little bit more on the cautious side, especially if you're going into Knights or something with very, very high AP. All of that together, he can take over a flank very, very quickly. He's a pretty good rapid ingress threat just on his own. And if your opponent is not able to immediately deal with him, he can cause some really, really big problems. In conclusion, the Carnifexes are cool. You can do some fun things with them, but I think they are probably just missing the mark to be considered one of our top meta monsters. They're in this awkward spot of they can't be too cheap because of their defensive profile. And they're also not really expensive, but it does kind of feel like they are. I don't know if that makes sense, but like 115 points, that's cheap for a monster, right? But then like when you look at what the Carnifex does, it doesn't really do a whole lot for that amount. Especially when, for the same points total, you could just get a Psychophage that's going to buff the rest of your melee army. And it probably does the same job as just a single Carnifex. I don't know. Maybe if you do the Crusher Stampede combo that we were talking about, maybe Carnifex is a little bit better than the Psychophage. However, it doesn't really create any kind of like big cohesion through your army besides it being a dumb monster. I think a little bit more points drops would help, but if they just went in the next data slate, if we, that's going to be a long time from now, but if they just went in and said Carnifex is our 3-up to hit, maybe even keep the 4-up to ballistic skill, I wouldn't care too much, but Carnifex is our 3-up to hit and they're 110 points, maybe we run them, maybe we bring them back. Have you been running Carnifexes? Have you been using the old One Eye and double Carnifex blob? It's a lot of fun, but maybe right now it's just not the best. All right, everybody, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching and all the support that has been coming in. If you have a video topic that you would like to see me discuss here on the channel, put it down below in the comments. I'd love to read it. Love to see what the Hive Mind is talking about. Thank you again for all the support, and I'll see you next time. Bye.